Hello. Today we're going to look at implementing a professional IT contract management process in the corporate world. My name is Philip David. I'm a partner at Rapidknhowhow and I'm a long-term management consultant, coach and trainer to support you in achieving your sourcing and procurement career goals. What will you learn in this course or in this tutorial? First of all, how to set up a professional contract management process as a sourcing and procurement specialist or consultant. You're also going to be able to manage complex stakeholder processes in an all-in-one management process which you lead. You will learn the importance of applying a process in a complex corporate environment. It should also give your team members a tool in the future as lead buyers to manage your contracts. And of course, more lastly, enhance the relationship and the communication with the internal stakeholders which you will work with in the future. Now we're going to look at for whom is this tutorial. This is actually really being aimed at sourcing and procurement experts in business to develop their career, young professionals who are planning to go in the field of sourcing and procurement, and CPOs, Chief Procurement Officers, who would like to establish a professional contract management process to become leaders in their business. We're now going to look at the content of this tutorial. We're going to start out with page 5, which looks at the professional IT contract management process in a holistic view and the key elements. At page 6, we're going to look at the value of the process to the stakeholder groups. What does this process bring to the stakeholder groups? We're afterwards at page 7 going to look at the scope finding from approaches to strategies. How you manage obstacles, for example. At page 8, you're going to look at scope finding checklist. This is a simple but practical template in order to look at the scope if it's professionally being managed. At page 9, you're going to look at the case study from the past. This is going to be my personal case study, which I would like to share with you within a client in the energy sector when I worked as a IT procurement consultant in the past. At page 10, we're going to look at the contract structure, definition, and the caterpillars. The main caterpillars in order to have a professional contract structure. At page 11, we're going to look at the communication. Here, the template to manage effectively your communication. At page 12, also we will be looking at the communication and the recommendations on how to manage effectively your communication. At page 13, we're going to look at all about contract documentation and how to approach this. How you can approach contract management in terms of the documentation and how you can manage this professionally. At page 14, we're going to look at the reporting. What are the key elements of a professional reporting in this process? At page 15, we're going to look at the tutorial closure. Yes, we're now going to look at the professional IT contract management process, which is called the PCM. Just for an information, this process does not only restrictively have to be applied at the IT spend, but can also be applied at management consulting, legal spend, any other spend where you believe this is important for you in order to professionally manage your contract. The main elements here are, you have the scope finding, the contract structure, communication, documentation, and reporting. Now here the main topics which you should really look at and see for you in the future on how you can manage this professionally with the IT contract management. 3 notes. This is a hands-on approach of managing contracts, whereas a case study and IT contract is being applied. We will look at this in the next slides, that we're going to look at a case study from my past in order to see how you can apply this process and what were the results there. It also shows how a sourcing department should lead the contract management process in order to have the process in the hand. Yes, this is something that is also important, that a sourcing department should lead the contract and should not be only a support, as it is in many cases, but should actually be in the driving seat here. And can be a long-term process for any other category where the lead buyers manage contracts or suppliers. This can be a long-term process for any other category, like I mentioned at the start, which can be also done by other buyers and which you can share this process with in order for them to professionally manage the contract management process with PCM. Now, what value does this process actually bring? We're here going to look at the different stakeholder groups clustered in the purchasing department, legal and data privacy department, and primary function. We're going to start out with the purchasing department. Here, the purchasing department works with the legal department hand in hand to deliver an efficient contract process for the primary function. Now, this is actually always the aim of the purchasing department in order to have a contract management process in place, in order to give the information and the confidence for the other departments that they're leading this process. And the purchasing department or sourcing and procurement department is categorized for the sourcing specialist for designing the process, as this is a strategic topic. You will in many cases have an operative spend, strategic spend, project procurement spend. This is a topic which is very strategic. This is for the design process, especially something which is strategic. Purchasers should be responsible for designing the process. In case the strategic purchaser will also work hand in hand together with a performance management or program management, which could be within the department or in other departments, in order to have the slides correctly in place and have the process really step by step done in order to train the future colleagues. The purchasing department aims to deliver long-term total cost of ownership cost savings within establishing an efficient contract process. Now, the aim, of course, is always not only price as it is in the past. This is a very traditional model, but we're going to look this in other trainings and tutorials, the difference between price and total cost of ownership. Here, for a professional procurement expert, total cost of ownership should be the key, actually the key aim in order to reduce this. And with the contract management process now in place, this can be done. And yes, this leads us also to the next, the legal department and data privacy department, which is often in one department. In some cases they're separately split, is in many cases supporting the purchasing department to set up this process as a technical sparring partner for legal questions in the contracts. This means that the legal department wants to give the information, consultation, the know-how in order to structure professional frame contract, structure good project contract, for example, and support in the SLAs. You're going to look at this in the future contract structure, which we're going to look at in the future slides here in this training course. And yes, this is actually what the main aim is also for the legal and data privacy department. They're responsible for defining the legal entity within the contracts. These are also practical topics, which has also been in my past, where the actual legal entity is often not clear. This needs to be really done really upfront to see what legal entity will be implemented within the contract. Because once this is signed from all sides, to again undergo this through the contract pipeline and again have the signature process going on, this will again take a long time, and the stakeholders who are participating in this process are going to be frustrated. So this is something to really look at as well. You should give support on any questions which are legal related, service versus time and material contracting. These are topics to set up, for example, a contract which is a service contract or a time to material contract. Here you need the support from the legal department. What would this mean? A service contract is something which is ongoing, where there's not really you could say a direct linkage of a project. It could be, for example, an hourly wage of a consultant. It could be, for example, a daily fee. This is actually just giving a small insight on the title of what are they doing in the project. This is something this is more to do with the service contract. The time to material is behind a concrete project. This means, for example, that there are different 5 phases, for example, that you have a starting phase, a beginning phase where the contracts are, or the contract is being actually looked at from the perspective that the consultant has a clear aim, plan, how long they're going to stay. So this is the difference between the time to material contract and the service contract. Perhaps one more topic in the time to material contract, there's also something like called what are they going to achieve. So this is something also which should be included within the contract. Next, we're going to look at the primary function. Is the user buyer and a case of the software solution a coordinator towards the users, which is the IT department. So the user buyer actually who uses the software in order to give, for example, subscriptions to the business. So they're actually the gateway to the actual users using the software, the SI solution, for example. They know all about the subscriptions and they will know about the scope. So this will be also looked at the scope checklist, which we're going to look at afterwards. They will also manage the supplier in the implementation phase. So they're the ones that actually implement the supplier. They're the ones that are going to transform the supplier, the vendor, in order for them to be integrated within the organization. This raises a lot of questions as well. What ongoing running costs are going to be? And these are topics which, of course, should also be looked at the scope phase. Is the budget holder and will be keen on having a cost-effective software as a service solution? Here is the budget holder. This means they are the holder of the budget, they have the budget in place, and they will be keen on having a cost-effective software. As they're the ones that will be mostly responsible for having the signatures within the budget process and will be in the lead, they also need to tell you if there is even a budget in place and what are the probabilities of the budget going to be in place. So this is something which this is also something which will be looked at the scope checklist, and yes. A cost-effective software solution as a service solution is always the interest also of a primary function. So yes, this would be something to also watch out for. We're now going to look at the scope finding and tactical solutions for sourcing solution specialists in the PCM process. On the left side, you're going to have the topics where to watch out for or what to watch out for and how to correspond to this. First, we're going to look at scope has been defined without the sourcing department. How to correspond to this, understand and question the background of this action. This could be, for example, when you have a scope that has been defined without you as a sourcing specialist, you should really ask yourself, why has this been done? Why has this actually been done without you in place or being informed to actually be included within designing the scope process? Why aren't you included? I think this is something to also say, for the future it would be good that you're included in this process, because this will help you and support you in order to manage professionally the contracts, but it will also help, of course, the internal customers, the primary functions in the future, because they have someone to trust. I think you need to build the trust together with them, because this is all about the topic of trust, and should communicate this openly, and this should be something that should be discussed. The next point would be the sourcing department is not involved at the start of the contract management process. Was there an RFP implemented, or has there already been a pre-selection of a solution provider been done? Question this. For example, if there has been an RFP already done or a tender process been implemented, has there already been a pre-selection of a solution provider? If this has already been done, why has this already been done? You should ask yourself this, because this is actually called maverick buying. This is leading not only looking at the scope, but this is as a next topic that the supplier has already been discussed at or looked at, and they have been implemented already in order to be pre-selected. So I would look at the next, which is the scope, including already a specific IT provider or an IT solution. Again, why has this specific provider been taken? Lack of time by primary function, extension of a current contract with a vendor, or referral reference from another advocate being the primary function. So it could be, for example, a lack of time by the sourcing specialist that they, or also the internal department, the primary function, they have simply executed a contract and they've already looked at a provider because they have 3-4 days in order to have this selected, and this is a very short-term topic which should be looked at, because again, this is maverick buying. This should be handled in the future more professionally and more structured. Extension of a current contract with a vendor. If there's a prolongation with a contract, perhaps the primary unit had the strategy that they keep the conditions and continue working with the same conditions with the vendor. Of course, this could be due to many reasons. It could be, for example, that they didn't really care so much because it didn't have a high spend and it didn't really change any topic of budget, because this has been already granted for the last years. So this is really you could say something like not really a political topic or cost topic. So they said, why not just prolong the contract and continue working with the vendor? Is this good? I would say no. This needs to be again challenged. Referral reference from another advocate being the primary function. remember, you're going to also want to collaborate with your internal primary unit. Just remember that they are also having a collaboration with other primary units, and they're receiving reference from vendors. So this is this internal communication, which is not really including the sourcing department, and has also needs to be looked at, that the communication again here needs to be improved, that working together here would be important. Yes, that the advantages are highlighted towards the vendor, but also towards the primary unit. So these are topics which are also something that you need to look at. We're now going to look at the scope finding 10 points checklist. You might find other points besides these 10 points, but these 10 points, I must say from my experience as a sourcing professional, have been the main points in order to understand what is really behind the scope and what impacts do these topics have towards the scope. This needs to be analyzed up front or together with the primary unit in order to really understand how effective is the scope finding. First, we're going to start with what is the purpose of the solution? Process enhancement in a specific process. This means, for example, is this a sales solution or is this an administrative solution which is being bought by the organization? So all this has to do with the sales side. We're going to look at also the travel management software, which is also something which you can look at, and this also has something in terms of what actually impacts does this have on the costs. So we're all going to look at these kind of topics. How deep is the impact of the stakeholders within the PCM process, specifically the sponsors? As you know, there are often ad hoc decision makings. So once you have sponsors in the boat or in the steering group, which are, for example, vice president of the organization, or which are, for example, CEOs, they're the ones that actually decide. Now it's up to you as a sourcing professional to weigh up, should you actually say speed up the process and perhaps not look so detailed into the scope anymore, or market actually what is the purpose. So these are topics which you need to think of when you do, for example, a decision making in terms of if you want to do the PCM process professionally or if you want to do it ad hoc and just conclude the contract. Keep this in mind. This is something you need to weigh up. This is something you as a sourcing professional need to understand how important it is in terms of time and in terms of closure of the contract. One other topic is the contract being an existing or a new contract. If a contract is, for example, an existing contract, then it's going to be more likely a prolongation of a contract. This means there's going to be less administrative work. This topic of scope finding will be perhaps also less. There will be certain points which you're going to look at the contract, which you're going to, for example, change. There could be, for example, the payment terms from 48 days to, for example, 24 days. It depends all on what is actually being implemented within the contract. The new contract, this raises even more questions. This raises questions, for example, has there been an RFP done, a tender process implemented, or an RFI? How is the selection process being done of the different kind of scope finding? Next, we're going to look at what is the business model. Here I'm going to take an SIS solution, which is a travel management process optimization tool, which looks at, for example, the costs of consulting, customer support, optimization of rollout support, and further customization costs. So it's all to do with the cost factors to align this with a good business model. This, of course, can be on one side determined. This can be even determined in the contract, which I have also done in the past, which was also good to highlight to see what does the business model look like and what impacts do they have actually on the actual costs. Next, we're going to look at what are the numbers of subscriptions in the corporation. In the corporation, you're going to have different kind of subscriptions. So this whole topic of demand planning will be important to do together with your primary units. For sure, the demand planning is not your complete responsibility. This is something, a task, which can be done by different primary units. They're the ones that understand what the users want and how many subscriptions are really needed. So they're going to gather all this data and give you the number of subscriptions. Next, we're going to look at what are the must-have or nice-to-have features in the solution. Must-have is a solution, for example, that you want to book flights over a tool. This could be a must-have. This feature really needs to be in there. But for example, a demonstration of how many flights are booked and where they're booked. Maybe you have already an independent SIS solution. Maybe you're going to put this SIS solution, which you already have, and integrate this in the new solution. So the must-have is a checklist, another checklist to understand which features are really needed and why they're needed. This needs to be done together with the primary unit. Nice to have, like I mentioned, are features which are perhaps necessary but not so necessary, where there's not a real commitment by either the sponsors or the primary units in terms of budget, in terms of need, because the users perhaps do not need this, or there's another solution at place which can be integrated within the current solution. So these are kind of topics you need to think of. Next, we're going to look at what are the internal stakeholders' needs and further processes and the project team being installed. Here we're going to look at the different topics in terms of what project team should be installed and what stakeholders are really needed in order to accomplish the contract management process. Next, we're going to look at the costs being considered when implementing a contract with the new old vendor. What costs are actually being looked at? So all these costs, which I mentioned above, like customer support services, optimization of travel processes within the rollout support and customization costs, they all actually need to be looked at. Think of the new and old vendor what costs are going to be actually being applied. So you can do something like a business case, for example. This would help you. This actually aligns to the next check. Can the cost roughly be estimated one-off running and switch-off costs? So we're going to, of course, look at the implementation costs, the running, the maintenance costs, which has to do also with the rollout, customization support. It has to do also, for example, support, which you define in your SLA, the 24-hour support. These are typical running costs. When we look at the switch-off costs, we look at the costs where you switch off, for example, the solution. This means when the solution is not being needed anymore, what costs can there be actually done within the infrastructure or allocated to the infrastructure. These are things you need to think of. This could be, for example, a switch of data from one provider to another provider. What kind of transformation process will there be going on? So these are, again, some checks which you can do in order to actually have a good overview of the costs, the total cost of ownership costs. And this you can do already in this scope finding when you do your checklist. Now the most important topic is, has there been a budget being granted, and will the granted budget be actually be granted, but also on the other side, will there be also a chance that the budget will be granted? These are things, of course, together with the timeline and responsible persons who coordinate this process, this is something you need to understand. Because once you have a budget in place, or you know there's going to be a budget, just think of how sure it is that there's actually going to be a budget. I mean, you can do something like a KO criterium. When you say, for example, there's a budget in place, this is already good. Who is the person responsible? Then you have the person, that's also good, and he's coordinating this. Now, if you have, for example, not 100% sure answer yet if there's going to be a budget, you need to be sure that you understand if the person who you're going to put in charge is also going to be the person who is going to give you then insight how sure the budget will be actually approved. Because if there's a low probability, -5, you could say, or 50%, then there's a possibility that you invest a lot of time in a sourcing professional, and this will not be very good for you or for the organization. Of course, you can take this as a learning point for your PCM process, but in general, this is a waste of time, and I think you should more focus on, when you implement the PCM process, especially on a really realistic project which has been confirmed and there is a budget behind it. We're now going to look at a case study from my past projects. Here we're going to look at the project client, leading European player and foreign client in the energy sector. Here I worked as a consultant in the area of procurement. There I had a lot of challenges in terms of managing different kind of tender processes, coaching different team members in the area of procurement methods. And one topic which I couldn't really think of, which helped me actually to understand how important the PCM process was a contract management project, which I had to do in order to actually, first of all, deliver cost savings, but also I could see the different challenges in terms of stakeholder challenges, in terms of also not having a clear process, but also not really have a granted project. All these kind of topics to really take this and put a good process in place in order to understand how we can work with a concrete contract management process in order to reach our aims, which is a ready for business contract and a cost reduction in long term. Here, just to go more into the details, the challenge was to prolong a frame contract for the next 2 years in the area of facility management. Who provides an SIS solution plus the given infrastructure? So there was already a contract in place. The aim was to prolong the contract for the upcoming 2 years. It had to do with facility management. It was an SIS solution, and a given infrastructure was actually already provided. This means that we had a customer support, we had topics like hosting, we also had all this topic of subscriptions. So I thought, together with the stakeholders, the perfect strategy here is, after making a quick analysis, challenging a long-term costs in allocating hosting of software in-house or not outsourcing this activity. This means that we actually looked at how much are we actually spending at the moment when we not outsource the solution, but when we have this again in-house. Normally this is turned around that you outsource solutions, but here we had a team in place with 2 people, 2 persons who actually were ready to host the software, and it took them around 5% of their capacity in order to do so. We also decreased the number of subscriptions. This means we also did something like a demand planning within the group, and we understood how much demand in terms of is really needed. This was done with the primary unit. This was one subtask we did together. but the responsible person was a person from the primary unit, and the person looked at the subscriptions and looked as well how many are needed. And this was actually also together with the planning, 5-year planning, what subscriptions are needed in the next 5 years within the group. This of course reduced us then also costs, because we knew the concrete number, it was less than we actually had being under the contract. Also the topic of reducing features within the SI solution, which are not a must-have for primary units. So reducing features within the SIS solution is something which is also important. We had on one side also the strategy to challenge the vendor, see the flexibility of the vendor, because we didn't need all the features within the solution. So we actually argued or negotiated together what are the must-haves, and together with the primary unit we defined this, and we saw that the vendor was flexible, and this gave us also a very good feeling in terms of actually having a good strategic vendor in order to work with in the future. The duration to execute was 2 months. So we had 2 months in order to have a contract in place and ready for business. So we had this time frame in order to do the analysis, do the PCM plan, and next execute it and show the results to the different stakeholders. Here it was important that we also had a task force and a project plan, like I mentioned. The task force was handpicked people who were actually within the process and understood the importance, and they could really give an expert know-how. So there were no bystanders or people who did not really have something to say. So we had really a good team, an effective team, in order to execute the different tasks and reach the time frame. Overall, we had a TCO output of 250,000, reduction of running costs reduced, and a ready for business contract committed from all stakeholders in place. So this actually gave us an insight on what is possible if you implement a PCM process professionally, and how you can use this also with other contracts, IT contracts, but even other contracts which are also needed by my client in this term in the future. We are now going to look at the contract structure and the main 3 caterpillars. The main 3 caterpillars from my experience is a frame contract, a project contract, and a service level agreement. These 3 topics are often implemented when you have a PCM process. Sometimes it's just a prolongation of a certain project contract, like it was in the case of the facility management solution, which we talked about within the scope phase or presentation phase. We're going to look at the frame contract. The frame contract is enabled for the entire organization and is created with the vendor to aim to do long-term business. This means long-term business with a vendor urges to have a frame contract. Why? Because the frame contract can be applied by any organizational unit within the corporation. This could be the standard template which can be applied within SAP in order to do projects where you need an additional project contract and also a service level agreement. You could say the frame contract is the fundament in order to start business in long term with a vendor. This of course needs alignment through many stakeholders, but the most important stakeholder is the legal department. They will be your sparring partner, they will support you, they will give you the consultation you need in order to define a frame contract. Next, we're going to look at the project contract. The project contract is created when a certain project is defined and the organization opens the question time to material versus a service agreement. Time to material on one side is something where there's a certain project in place and the duration of the project is very clear. Here you're going to have the allocation of the consultants, project managers, or other PMOs towards the project. They will give a specific time when, or the people will be allocated to a specific time or phase of the project. Once you have, for example, an unknown time, how long the project will take, a service agreement is got. Here you're going to shortly have a description of the consultant, for example, and what his hourly fee is, or daily fee. These two you need to weigh up and see which one is more important, the time to material or service agreement. Preferably from the sourcing department you will have the time to material, because there you will not have unnecessary costs of manpower costs, extra budgets used for different consultants, external workforces, for example, because here you will have a set time, and once this is achieved, the allocation of the different external stakeholders is not anymore needed. Moreover, what is also something that is now in place is the SLA and the service level agreement. Here all the support times, the frequency will be aligned with the support types and services. Support times is on one side how often or how fast does a vendor need to react. You will have, for example, a 24-hour, 7-day support. This will be often more expensive than, for example, a 5-day support, which is from 9 to 6 p.m. So you need to state this within the service level agreement and negotiate as well with your internal stakeholders what is actually being needed in terms of support. What is actually being needed in order to align this together with your internal customer. This will be stated in an extra document. So this is often separately stated. Sometimes it's also included in the project contract. But these kind of setups, frame contract, project contract, and SLA are most likely the contract structure you're going to need in order to have a professional PCM process structure, contract structure for the future. We're now going to use or look at the communication template, which is a template which I've used in the past in order to do a professional PCM process. This actually gives you an overview of the open tasks which you have and which you're currently coordinating with the stakeholders. I would like to give you a quick insight on the main phases. On one side, you're going to have the contract process phase. Here you're going to have the scope finding, for example. You're going to have the stakeholders included, and for example, the open tasks, a specific task which you need to do in order to accomplish the scope finding process. In this case, we're going to see this topic of business case definition. This was the topic where we had in the PCM process the hosting costs in-house or externally. So we're calculating all the costs together in order to see what kind of improvement we can do on the bottom line, especially on the TCO costs. And this was something we did together in the team. This gave us also a comfort how we can go into the negotiation with the vendor. One topic were also the resources needed. Here we had to have a business template from the finance department and case studies from the past. So we looked at the case studies which were in the past where the question was raised in-house or external hosting, and what does this mean, for example, for the organization from from our organization in terms of costs and what kind of savings we can have. Here we also had an end date. Here it was the 23rd for example, here you can see 2017, 23rd of April, and yes, this was something that we actually achieved in 2 months. Just to summarize this above is a template which you can apply to coordinate your communication. So this is not a template which you have to have, but it should support you. It should give you then a tool, a support tool, a template in order to actually do your tasks and complete a professional PCM process. It should also give you a support to manage all tasks, like I mentioned, and it should be something like a support tool, not a must-have. Often, due to time constraints, you're going to have, for example, not the real opportunity or time in order to write down all the tasks within the template. Nevertheless, I would suggest you really to do this at the end of the day. It will help you to have an open mind as well for the future tasks. You will have a good organizational capability, and it will support you on doing, for example, the different kind of contract phases in the future. Keep this in mind. This will help you. This will support you. You can take it, but you can also leave it. It's up to you as a professional in procurement or a high potential is going into this business, or as a CPO who wants actually this communication template to be applied by your different employees or consultants. We're going to look now at the communication recommendations. The communication recommendations comes from practical insight from doing projects in the past. This was done when I was a consultant or project manager in different companies. Here I would like to give you a list on what to watch out for in the future. Always try to make the task force as lean as possible. The more stakeholders on board, the less chance you will accomplish the contract on time. Rule: no bystanders. So people, for example, or stakeholders where you believe they bring not any value towards the project, you should eliminate them in terms of not including them in the project. You should not make a big political revolt, but you should clearly state or challenge them what they bring to the project. This is something which you also have to do. You want to have one person, and this is really to keep in mind, that is the expert in a field. For example, you have the legal expert, you have from the primary unit, for example, for all this topic of demand planning, business case development, etc. And you have yourself and a vendor, for example, a spokesperson. So you need a spokesperson from each party in order to have a lean team and a lean task force. Why? First of all, it's easier to coordinate tasks. It's more efficient. On the second, you will also have, for example, an easier communication towards the sponsors. Next, we're going to look at the motivate experts to give you know-how on their expert fields. Challenge them with your know-how from the past, motivate the experts to deliver value in the project, and your role is that you are a leader of the PCM. Don't forget, of course, you're going to be the sourcing specialist. In this field, you're the real expert. But you also need to take on the role to motivate different experts in order to give their know-how as well. This means you're leading now the communication, and you're not anymore actually supporting, as it is often or was in case in the sourcing department when they were just there when, for example, doing administrative processes or leading administrative processes, for example, a signature process of a contract, etc. Now you're in the lead of the project and you need to be able to motivate the experts. This is important. Make a role overview analysis. Who is responsible for what to enable an effective process implementation? Of course, having an effective process implementation is something that you need to look out for. Being effective in leading the project is something where you need to also be able to implement the project and understand who is responsible for what. For example, the budgeting process. You will have a specific person. For example, for technical questions due to a certain feature, you will have a certain person who is also responsible and giving you the feedback on if this is needed, if this is a must-have or a nice-to-have. All these kind of overviews you need to do in one analysis, and this is called the role overview analysis. Stick to the process, but do not see that this is the only chance you will implement the process. See it as a test case you will have many times until the process is fully established. The process is a process which is something where you learn. So it doesn't mean, for example, you have to have a rigid process and this will not be changed. Apply the process which I'm showing you. But if you believe there are certain tasks which are not really needed because you believe this will not work with the stakeholders, then leave it out. This should give you just a help, a support tool in order to implement the project. And in order, of course, to implement the project in the future for your colleagues, for yourself, for other, for example, categories for where you manage the spend. Next, we're going to look at always put the closure of the contract in first place. It is about the aim to achieve the contract and not about the process itself, which should help the stakeholders for the future. The contract should be in place and should be often in short term implemented. Be implemented means that, for example, where this is not really being a good test where there's a short time frame, or for example where the process is, for example, not being really implemented. Use, as they say, a quick and dirty approach in contract management is not the PCM process. So the PCM process is something which helps you and supports you. This you should look at when there's a certain time perhaps, but you can of course apply it when there is less time. Just know all the obstacles and challenges you will have, and this should support you in order to lead the process. You're in the leadership role, and this is my actual communication recommendation for you in the future as a procurement consultant or professional. We're now going to look at the documentation within the PCM process. Here we have the key questions in the process. Where should the contracts be placed when signed from all sides? Online storage, for example, an ERP system, and on an on-site documentation. The question here is, would you like all the contracts to be placed within the ERP system under, for example, a contract place, an e-procurement solution where you have all the contracts under one feature within the different, for example, ERP system you're using at the moment. Make sure that you understand that the ERP system should be something where you can also communicate different contracts, for example, communication can be done within the contract module. So this gives you also support, for example, where you have a latest or last version of the contract. In this case, an ERP system is ideal. Also, this topic of on-site documentation. This could be, for example, also from my past when I did a Solvency II project, where it was important to actually have the documentation also on site, because there were auditors who looked at the contracts and saw or were checking the contracts if they're in place or not. So you could also discuss the different documentations together with the auditors and you have a document which is on site and which can be, for example, applied now for the other sourcers or procurement experts, or for example for the primary units who have also a contract on site in place. Also know this topic of efficiency, something of course an on-site documentation can be costly in terms of paper, print, and all this signature process, which, for example, you can also have an efficient way when signing, for example, contracts. This can be directly done within an ERP system. So make yourself sure that you understand what the importance is of both sides and see what is more important now for you and your stakeholders. Include this as an important question as well, which needs to be discussed together with the stakeholders within the PCM process. Next, we're going to look at who is responsible for the scanning, placement, and proactive stakeholder for questioning. Lead buyers or primary function. Scanning, placement, proactive stakeholder management. These are questions, for example, the sourcer does, the sourcing expert or consultant, or for example, the primary unit does this. Most of the time, this is a classical topic which the procurement department does and leads. And yes, this would be something to also look at and see who does what. Next, also, who should be able to see the contracts and who should there be, or for example, should there be restrictions on certain stakeholders to see the contracts? So I would really recommend here to see if there should be some certain restrictions within the system, that certain departments should not be able to see the contract, or for example, certain stakeholders should not be using the contract. This could be also something interesting for you as a consultant or as a procurement expert to see how this topic of agency theory works and why actually not open communication is being implemented. Keep this in mind also when you do a proper documentation process, and this will help you also with your PCM in the future. We're going to look now at the reporting process. Here the key messages are: have an overview of the status of the contract status always available within your PCM. Why? Because this helps you to report. This gives you the actual information. You can do this on daily basis to give, for example, your sponsors, your steering group, the information which they need in order, for example, also report up to the top management. So you need to be always on the pulse. You need to know where you are at the moment. What is, for example, the contract status? Have you aligned this with the legal department? Have you, for example, defined the scope? All these kind of topics are good for you and will help you in order to give the right information to your sponsors, but also to your steering group. It can also be, for example, questions from the task force. This can also, for example, be something where you can communicate with the task force together and communicate what they need, what kind of information they perhaps need to also report. So be able to think like in a matrix organization. Everyone needs to report to different stakeholders. Be able to actually participate in this and be able to be the owner of the reporting process as well, although you're in the sourcing department. This is actually one main responsibility as well, that you be able to report well, give well information to the different stakeholders, because you're in the lead of the PCM process. Report the actual status in an ERP system or within an Excel file, where all internal stakeholders involved should have access. Yes, be able to actually have an Excel file or an ERP system where you can also openly communicate what is the actual status. You can give, for example, also a weekly report to the stakeholders. This is also something which I did in the past. or after accomplishing each task, you give an update to the different stakeholders. This could be, again, when you did, for example, a business case, when you, for example, determined the must-haves or nice-to-haves of the SIS solution. Here you can, for example, give also the reporting to the different stakeholders within the ERP system. You can give an invitation. This is also something where you can invite different stakeholders which are in the lead as well as they are in the task force to be in the ERP system to have the actual insight on the reporting of the PCM process, of the contract you're currently handling. Share practices with the vendor to let him understand that you have a process in place now. So if you're working together with the vendor, be able to give a certain in-place information, share practices with the vendor, open-minded, give them, for example, vendor information where you believe, without stating any names, where you believe they can learn as well. So you need to have this learning loop as well. You will need, for example, vendors that learn from you as well, and this will give you a support for the future projects as well when you work together with the vendor. Inform sponsors or your superior on the results, how the process has helped you when implemented in a contract. So you should also give the sponsors or the superior, who is often also within the steering group, the results and how this helped you actually to accomplish your tasks. Also give, every time you run through the PCM process, what has not worked so well. So you, perhaps this could be a good number, 5 times do the PCM process until actually the process where you say you are now actually in the lead, this has helped you in the past, will give you, for example, a tool, a right tool in order for the future, in order to implement this together with the vendors and the internal stakeholders. So this should be something practical. You should share this together with your superiors. You should reflect and inform your sponsors. Yes, I would like to thank you now for being part of the tutorial. And yes, it was, I hope, something where you believe you can apply in the future. You can also test your capabilities for other, for example, topics where you believe you would like to learn under www.rapidknhowhow.com. This is our corporate website, and here you can participate in order to visit us, and you can also subscribe to the website to receive an on-demand solution. We provide tailored solution on how to turn your life vision and career goal into results rapidly. So this would be something that will help you as a procurement expert to rapidly enable your career to be improved, as you're going to be now in the lead of managing topics, because this PCM process should have given you now an insight that you received a leading tool and a leading way in order to manage your different kind of stakeholders. You can also link up with me under the following LinkedIn address, which is linkedin.com Philip David Consulting. You can also look up under Philip David Consulting and you can link up with me. We can book an individual coaching with our solution Rapidknhowhow Business Coaching under the following session and subscribe under the corporate website. And I'm wishing you all the best. I hope to hear from you in the future, and for any extra comments, please leave them under Udemy. You can also leave them, for example, questions. You can send me an email any way you want to. I'm looking forward in order to receive your call or your action, and I would like to thank you, and I'm looking forward to do future business with you, and I wish you all the best. Bye bye.